Hey, so glad you got here. We were totally waiting for you, just about to listen to a story that drifts through forgotten valleys, hidden paths, and a place so well concealed that even wandering ravens seem to lose their way before reaching IT. Tonight's tale carries you into a medieval world where maps end in uncertain ink, where old forests whisper louder than kings, and where one lonely traveler is about to stumble across a village that time itself appears to have overlooked. Thankfully, the only thing chasing you tonight is curiosity, which is much less troublesome than an angry goose, though medieval geese certainly believed they ruled the world. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, I'd love for you to leave a comment telling everyone where you're listening from and what your local time is. It's always fascinating seeing just how far these stories travel. Now settle in, get comfortable, and just relax. Today's tale starts like this. There was once a man who earned his living by walking roads that sensible people avoided, not because he enjoyed danger. Far from IT. If given the choice between crossing a vole-filled forest or spending an afternoon sitting beside a warm bakery, he would choose the bakery every single time. Unfortunately, warm bakeries rarely paid travelers to deliver messages between distant monasteries, forgotten keeps, and villages so small they barely deserved a place on a tax collector's list. His name mattered little. Roads have a habit of wearing names away until people become known simply as the messenger, the traveler, or occasionally, that fellow whose mule keeps eating my vegetables. His mule, incidentally, had developed an extraordinary talent for identifying expensive gardens from impossible distances. Nitrogen monoxide one knew how. Perhaps vegetables emitted some secret perfume detectable only by stubborn mules. Scholars never investigated this mystery, which feels like a missed opportunity. The morning began beneath a blanket of soft gray clouds. Mist rolled lazily between the hills, wrapping every tree in pale ribbons that shifted with the breeze. Birds called somewhere overhead, though none could actually be seen. Every now and then, a branch creaked loudly enough to suggest either a passing deer or a very dramatic squirrel. The traveler followed an old woodland path that appeared on maps copied more than a century earlier. At least, someone claimed IT did. Medieval maps were wonderfully optimistic creations. A mountain might appear where nitrogen monoxide mountain existed. A river might wander wherever the artist thought rivers looked pleasant, and dragons occasionally decorated corners simply because empty parchment seemed lonely. As he walked, towering beeches filtered the daylight into soft green patterns dancing across the earth. The air smelled of damp moss, crushed fern, and fresh bark. Somewhere nearby, water trickled gently over hidden stones. The forest felt ancient, not frightening, simply old, E-N-O-U-G-H, that every fallen tree looked as though another forest had grown upon IT, old enough that roots had begun swallowing abandoned milestones until only curious lumps remained above the earth. People often believed forests were silent. They were mistaken. Leaves whispered constantly. Woodpeckers hammered invisible drums, tiny insects buzzed beneath flowers. Far above, unseen branches rubbed together with slow groans like elderly monks complaining about cold weather. The traveler enjoyed these sounds. Silence, in truth, usually meant something unpleasant was watching. Noise meant life carried on as expected. By midday, he reached a weathered stone marker leaning sideways beneath. Ivy, most of its carved writing, had vanished beneath centuries of rain. Only one symbol remained clear, a circle. Inside it, 3 small trees. He frowned. He had never seen this mark before. Curiously, medieval villages often used symbols instead of written names because many ordinary people could not read. A carved sheaf of wheat, a fish, a tower, or a simple tree could identify an entire settlement without requiring a single letter. Yet this symbol appeared on none of the documents he carried. He brushed moss away. Nothing. Only the 3 trees. His mule sniffed the stone, then immediately ignored history in favor of chewing a nearby bush. Priorities, the road narrowed. Soon it became little more than 2 faint tracks pressed into soft earth. Branches reached overhead until they nearly touched, weaving a tunnel of leaves that dimmed the afternoon sun. Hours slipped quietly past. Oddly, he noticed something peculiar. The forest remained healthy, too healthy. Usually travelers encountered chopped stumps, charcoal burners, wandering shepherds, or children collecting firewood. Here, nothing. Nitrogen monoxide axe marks. Nitrogen monoxide grazing animals. Nitrogen monoxide smoke rising. Beyond distant trees, it was as though human hands had politely agreed never to interfere. That should have felt comforting. Instead, it made him strangely aware of every footstep. The path curved gently around an enormous oak, whose trunk looked older than several kingdoms. There, half hidden beneath tangled ivy, stood another stone, the same symbol. 3 trees inside a circle, this time an arrow pointed west. The traveler hesitated. His instructions mentioned nitrogen monoxide western turn. The official road continued south, which meant someone had deliberately maintained this forgotten route for reasons unknown. Curiosity has always been both humanity's greatest strength and its most reliable method of creating unnecessary problems. He chose the western path, naturally. Within minutes the forest changed. Not dramatically, subtly. The air grew cooler, the birds quieter. Wildflowers appeared beside the trail in unusual abundance. Small, white blossoms covered the ground like scattered stars. Butterflies drifted lazily through shafts of sunlight. The smell of pine gradually replaced damp oak. Then came something even stranger. The path was swept clean. Not perfectly, but recently, enough that fallen branches had been moved aside. Someone walked here regularly. Yet nitrogen monoxide footprints marked the damp soil, only smooth earth. His pace slowed. Ahead, the trees began thinning. Golden afternoon light spilled between their trunks. He heard water, not a stream, a river. Beyond that, a bell, just once. A single clear note, then silence again. Not the loud bells of cathedrals. This sounded smaller, gentler, like someone quietly reminding the day that evening would eventually arrive. He stepped through the final line of trees. The forest opened. Before him stretched a broad green valley surrounded entirely by wooded hills. Fields spread neatly across, gentle slopes. Stone cottages rested beneath thatched roofs. Thin columns of smoke rose peacefully into the still air. Sheep grazed behind low walls. Children chased one another across open grass. A wooden water wheel turned slowly beside the river. Everything looked ordinary, wonderfully ordinary, and yet He knew with complete certainty this village did not exist on any map he had ever carried. Far below, several villagers paused in their work. One woman lowered her basket. An old man stopped sharpening a scythe. Even the children gradually slowed until every face turned toward the stranger standing at the edge of their hidden world. No one waved. No one shouted. No one ran away. They simply watched, as though they had just spotted something they had not seen for an incredibly long time. Perhaps someone exactly like him. The traveler adjusted the strap of his satchel, took one careful breath, and began walking down the narrow path toward the village that time had somehow forgotten. The path into the valley descended in quiet bends, each turn revealing a little more of the village below. The traveler noticed first that there were nitrogen monoxide proper walls. Most medieval villages preferred at least a ditch, a hedge, or the comforting illusion of defense, because people in those days had a troubling habit of arriving with banners, debts, or sharp objects. This place had only low stone borders and lines of berry bushes, heavy with dark fruit. Either the villagers trusted the hills completely, or they had never met tax collectors, which would explain the calm expressions. As he came closer, the bell sounded again. One soft note. A few villagers returned to their tasks, but many remained still, watching him cross the meadow path. Their clothes were plain wool and linen, dyed in muted greens, browns, and grays, with belts of braided cord and little wooden charms hanging at the hip. Nothing looked wealthy. Nothing looked poor either. IT was the kind of practical clothing that sighed quite clearly, "I have survived 12 winters and have nitrogen monoxide patience for decorative sleeves." A boy nitrogen monoxide, older than 10, stood near a fence with a stick in one hand and a turnip in the other. The boy stared. The mule stared back. The turnip suffered the consequences. "Oh, the boy whispered, though not loudly enough to defend his vegetable with true conviction. The traveler gave an apologetic shrug, the universal gesture of anyone traveling with an animal that considered morality optional. No one laughed, but one woman's mouth twitched. That tiny, almost smile was the first welcome he received. At the foot of the path, 3 adults waited beside a stone well. The eldest among them was a woman with silver hair braided down her back and eyes as pale as winter sky. Beside her stood a broad-shouldered man carrying a woodcutter's axe, though he held IT low, not threateningly. The third was younger, perhaps a healer, judging by the pouch of dried herbs at her waist and the way she examined the traveler as though already deciding what illness he might bring. The old woman spoke first. "You came from beyond the trees." IT was not a question. The traveler nodded. "I followed the western path." The woodcutter looked toward the hills. "There is nitrogen monoxide western path." This seemed unfair, since the traveler had just used IT. Still, he had learned that arguing with people holding axes rarely improved conversations. There was a marker. He sighed gently. 3 trees inside a circle. At this, several villagers exchanged glances. Not fearful, exactly. More like people hearing an old song played at the wrong season. The healer stepped forward and looked at his boots, his cloak, his satchel, then his mule, who was now investigating whether the well rope might be edible. "Are you alone? YES. Are others behind you? No. Are you followed? Not unless you count bad luck." The boy with the missing turnip snorted. There it was, a crack in the stillness. The old woman considered him for a long moment. In many villages, strangers were greeted with suspicion because they might carry news, disease, debts, or worse, songs learned in cities. In this village, suspicion felt older, woven carefully into habit. "You may water your beast," she sighed. "Then you will speak." It was not exactly hospitality, but it was better than being chased uphill by people with farm tools. The traveler bowed his head. The villagers made room, though only just enough. As he led the mule to the trough, he noticed more details. Nitrogen monoxide chapel stood in the center square. There was a small shrine beneath an ash tree, decorated with ribbons, carved birds, and smooth river stones, but nitrogen monoxide priest moved among the people. No manor house overlooked the cottages. Nitrogen monoxide lord's banners snapped in the breeze. Nitrogen monoxide stocks waited beside the green. Even the blacksmith's forge, though sturdy, bore nitrogen monoxide mark of guild or noble ownership. A village without a lord was rare. A village without a priest was rarer. A village without both was the kind of thing that made royal officials develop headaches. The houses were arranged in a wide circle around the green, doors facing inward. At the circle's center stood a flat stone set into the grass, its surface carved with the same sign of 3 trees. Fresh flowers had been laid upon it. The traveler's eyes lingered there. The old woman noticed. "You look too much." "I am a messenger," he replied. "Looking is most of the trade. And speaking? That depends who is paying." This time the woodcutter's beard shifted slightly. A laugh was hiding in there somewhere, perhaps shy from lack of practice. The old woman lead him toward a bench beneath the ash tree. Villagers returned slowly to their chores, though their attention remained fixed on him in the way cats pretend not to watch a fish stall. He sat. The mule drank as though personally offended by thirst. "What is your name?" the old woman asked. He gave it. Several villagers murmured softly, repeating the sound as if testing whether it belonged to any memory. "And where do you serve?" "Nitrogen monoxide lord permanently," he sighed. "Mostly monasteries. Merchants, sometimes reeves, sometimes widows, with sharper tongues than any noble sword." The healer tilted her head. "What is a reeve?" The traveler stared before he could stop himself. Every village knew reeves. They collected dues, managed lands, carried orders, and made themselves disliked with impressive efficiency. "You truly do not know?" The old woman's gaze sharpened. "We SK. You answer." So he explained, carefully, simply. As he spoke, the villagers gathered again in loose circles, listening as though he described creatures from a bestiary, tax officers, shire courts, market tolls, border, wars, bishops, coinage changes, new roads, burned roads, lords marrying heiresses and claiming hills they had never climbed. With each word, the valley seemed to grow quieter. The traveler began to understand that he had not merely found a remote village. He had crossed into a pocket of the world that had stopped expecting news. Then the old woman asked the question that chilled him more than suspicion had. "Who rules beyond the southern mountains now?" He answered with the king's name. Nitrogen monoxide recognition passed across their faces. The woodcutter frowned. "That is not the king." "No," the traveler sighed softly. "Not for nearly 80 years." A breeze moved through the ash leaves. One ribbon came loose from the shrine and drifted down onto the grass. The healer touched the charm at her belt. The old woman closed her eyes just briefly. When she opened them again, she looked not frightened, but tired in a way the traveler recognized from old roads and older graves. Then much has passed, she sighed. Yes, and yet the hills kept silent. No one replied. From somewhere behind the cottages came the smell of baking barley bread, warm and nutty. IT floated through the square with almost comic gentleness, as if the world had decided that astonishing revelations should still be accompanied by carbohydrates. A little girl approached with a wooden cup of water and offered it to the traveler. Her mother whispered sharply, but the old woman raised one hand, permitting IT. He accepted. Thank you. The girl stared at his cloak pin, which was shaped like a small copper hair. Does IT run at night? Only when I owe money. She smiled, then quickly hid behind her mother's skirt. That smile changed something. Not much, but enough. The villagers still watched him as a danger, but also as a man who could joke with children, and whose mule had criminal opinions about turnips. These things mattered. In small places, trust often arrived not as a grand declaration, but as a cup of water passed by a child. The old woman stood. You will remain until evening. Again, not a question. And after evening, we decide. The traveler looked toward the western path, now hidden by distance and shadow. He wondered whether he could even find IT again. Above the valley, the hills stood close and green, their forested ridges folded together like hands guarding a secret. Smoke drifted upward from thatched roofs. The river shone in the slanting light. Somewhere, someone began humming a tune with nitrogen monoxide words. The village had accepted his presence for the length of an afternoon, nothing more. Yet as he sat beneath the ash tree, holding the wooden cup in both hands, he felt the strange weight of the place settle around him. Here, every sunrise had apparently arrived without kings. Every harvest had ripened without taxes. Every child had learned the valley before learning the world. And now he, a dusty man from roads they had forgotten existed, had stepped across their silent border, carrying 80 years of unwanted time in his satchel. By evening, the traveler had been given a place near the edge of the green, not quite among the villagers, but not outside the circle either. That, he decided, was progress. In most settlements, a stranger was either welcomed with bread or watched from behind shutters until he went away. Here, the people had invented a third option, polite containment. IT was rather like being treated as a loose goat with suspicious intentions. A bowl of thick pottage was brought to him by the healer, who introduced herself only as Mara. The stew held barley, onions, beans, and a few herbs he did not recognize. IT tasted earthy, warm, and better than anything eaten from a roadside pouch had any right to be compared with. His mule received hay, water, and one stern warning from the turnip boy, who now guarded a basket like a knight protecting a holy relic. The villagers ate in small family groups before their cottages, speaking quietly. Nitrogen monoxide bells rang for prayer. Nitrogen monoxide Lord Steward came to count grain. Nitrogen monoxide priest crossed the green with grave authority, and an expression suggesting that joy should be scheduled more responsibly. Instead, after the meal, the people gathered around the flat stone at the center of the village. Lamps were lit. Their flames shimmered amber in the deepening blue dusk. The old woman stood, upon the grass beside the carved symbol. Her name, the traveler learned, was Etta. Not Lady Etta, not Mother Etta, just Etta. That alone told him much. "We have heard the roadman," she sighed. Roadman. He had been called worse, though usually by innkeepers after discovering his mule in the cabbage yard. He says the outer crown has changed. A murmur passed through the crowd. He says old borders are nitrogen monoxide, longer old borders. Men we never knew have risen, ruled, and gone to dust. The traveler felt many eyes turned toward him. He wished, suddenly, that he had brought better news. A royal wedding, perhaps, a fine harvest, a story about a bishop falling into a fish pond. Anything lighter than the simple cruelty of time. Etta continued. He also came alone. He carried nitrogen monoxide blade beyond a road knife. He answered when asked. He drank what was offered. He did not mock our ways. The turnip boy muttered something. Not loudly, Etta added. A few villagers smiled. There it was again. That careful softening. Then the villagers began speaking one by one. Not all at once. Not chaotically. Each person placed a hand briefly upon the flat stone before offering an opinion. The traveler realized this was their council. Nitrogen monoxide shouting. Nitrogen monoxide noble, presiding from a carved chair. Nitrogen monoxide clerk scratching notes. Just hands on stone, voices in turn, and the patience to listen. IT was so sensible that naturally no kingdom would ever approve of IT. Some wanted him gone by dawn. Some said he should be blindfolded and ellied back through the trees. One elderly shepherd suggested keeping him until they knew whether the outer world was diseased. Curse, are merely annoying. A woman with flour on her sleeves asked whether he knew new songs. This question produced more interest than his political news had, which was understandable. Kings came and went. But a good song could survive 6 generations if the chorus was simple enough and slightly rude. At last, Mara spoke. He is tired. He is hungry. His beast is greedy, but not wicked. The mule brayed at that exact moment, which did little to strengthen her argument. He should remain 3 days, Mara said. Long enough for us to learn whether he brings danger. Long enough for him to learn that silence here is not emptiness. The phrase settled over the green. Silence here is not emptiness. Etta nodded once. So it will be. And just like that, the traveler was permitted to stay. 3 days. Nitrogen monoxide, more promised. Nitrogen monoxide, less granted. A sleeping place was made for him in an unused shed beside the mill. IT smelled of straw, old grain, and the faint, dusty sweetness of stored apples. A wool blanket was provided, patched in several places but clean. The traveler thanked them properly, and the old miller, a bent man with eyebrows like frightened caterpillars, told him not to snore because the mill already complained enough at night. That was the first direct joke anyone made to him. He treasured IT. The next morning, he woke before sunrise to a village already moving. Mist lay low over the fields. Figures passed through IT, carrying tools, baskets and bundles of kindling. Cows lowed in small sheds. Chickens scratched near doorways with the smug confidence of creatures descended from tiny feathered tyrants. The river turned silver. Beneath the first light, nitrogen monoxide 1 gave orders. No overseer shouted, yet everyone seemed to know where to go. The traveler helped where he could, because nothing earns trust faster than carrying heavy things. without complaining too artistically. He mended a broken fence rail with the woodcutter, whose name was Torin. He hauled sacks near the mill. He helped Mara gather comfrey and yarrow along the river bank. While they worked, he asked careful questions, not too many. Questions like onions could be useful in small amounts and overpowering when thrown everywhere. He learned that the village called itself Avonmere. The name stirred nitrogen monoxide memory. He learned that nitrogen monoxide 1 left the valley except for rare journeys to the outer ridge, where hunters set markers and checked old paths. He learned that every child was taught 3 rules before letters, numbers, or how not to fall into the duck pond. First, never cross beyond the ring stones alone. Second, never light a fire on the high ridge. Third, never speak the old names where echoes may carry. That third rule interested him most. Mara would not explain it. Torin pretended not to hear. The turnip boy, whose name was Pep, said he knew all the old names but would only reveal them in exchange for a copper coin, a knife, and legal rights to the mule. The traveler declined these fair and balanced terms. Avonmere's people were not ignorant. That surprised him. They tracked seasons with notched sticks and star patterns. They stored seed grain in clay-lined pits. They knew which bark eased fever, which mushrooms were safe, and which were safe only if one wished to meet one's ancestors urgently. They could repair tools, weave cloth, brew ale, set bones, smoke fish, and predict rain from the angle of swallows. But of the wider realm, they knew almost nothing. Their history ended at the mountains, or rather IT had been folded inward there. By the second day, more villagers spoke with him. They asked about markets, coins, ships, bishops, roads, and whether cities truly smelled as bad as old stories claimed. Worse, he sighed. This answer appeared to confirm several private theories. One woman asked if knights still wore iron from head to toe. Yes, he answered, though mostly when trying to impress other men wearing iron from head to toe. Torin liked that one. Trust came slowly, like thaw through frozen soil. The traveler noticed it in small permissions. A child sat nearer. A man turned his back, without fear. Mara let him carry her basket. Edda allowed him to stand beside the council stone without being asked to step away. On the third evening, as gold light spilled over the valley, Edda invited him to walk beyond the last cottages. They followed a narrow lane between barley fields, where the grain whispered softly in the breeze. At the field's edge stood a row of old houses, collapsed long ago. Their stones were moss-covered. Their doorways opened onto nothing. First dwellings, Edda said. Why were they abandoned? Too close to the path. The traveler looked toward the forest. So your families moved inward. Our grandparents' grandparents did. The words were careful. He waited. Edda touched one ruined wall. They came here with nothing but seed, tools, children, and terror. They left behind banners, oaths, debts, and graves they could not dig. The traveler sighed nothing. The evening insects hummed around them. Far away, Pip shouted at the mule, who had apparently resumed diplomatic relations with stolen vegetables. Edda's face softened, but her eyes remained fixed on the ruins. They were not cowards, she sighed. Remember that, roadman. The world calls people cowards when they choose not to die for another man's pride. He bowed his head. I will remember. And he did, because in that quiet row of fallen stones He began to understand Avenir not as a village lost by accident, but as one hidden by choice, a refuge, a refusal, a small human answer to wars that had swallowed names, farms, sons, and songs. The families who founded IT had not vanished because history forgot them. They had vanished because history had become too hungry. On the fourth morning, the traveler learned that Avonmere did not begin its day with bells, prayers, or shouted orders. IT began with smoke. Thin blue strands rose from cottage roofs before the sun had climbed above the eastern ridge. Hearths woke first, then hands, then voices. Doors opened one by one. Someone coughed. Someone laughed softly. A rooster announced his greatness with the confidence of a tiny feathered herald who had never once been invited to negotiate peace. The traveler stepped from the mill shed and found Pip waiting with 2 wooden pails. "You're to help with water," the boy sighed. "Am I? Unless roadmen melt in wells. Only expensive ones." Pip considered this. "You don't look expensive." A fair judgment. Together they crossed to the well, where villagers had already formed a loose line. Nitrogen monoxide 1 pushed ahead. Nitrogen monoxide 1 argued. Each household took what was needed, and if someone was old or carrying an infant, others filled their bucket first. IT looked simple, perhaps for kingdoms. The traveler had seen villages where water rights caused quarrels lasting generations. One family would claim a spring because a great-uncle had once sneezed near it heroically. Another would insist a ditch belonged to them by ancient custom, even though the ditch mostly produced frogs and bad smells. Avonmere avoided this through a rule carved into a plank. Beside the well, Pip read it aloud with great ceremony. Water first to thirst, then hearth, then beast, then field. The mule, waiting nearby, gave an offended snort. "You're fourth," the traveler told him. "Accept the law." The mule did not accept the law. That morning became a lesson in Avonmere's order. There were nitrogen monoxide written charters sealed by nobles. Nitrogen monoxide steward kept accounts in wax tablets. Instead, the village lived by remembered rules, spoken so often they had become part of the air. A loaf from every 10th baking went to the common shelf. Nitrogen monoxide family harvested alone. Tools belonged to their maker, but their use could not be denied during planting or storm. Nitrogen monoxide child could be struck in anger. Nitrogen monoxide quarrel could cross. Sunset unresolved unless both parties agreed to remain foolish until morning. That last rule, Torrin explained, had saved more roofs than timber. Justice in Avonmere was stranger still. At midday, the traveler witnessed a dispute between 2 brothers over a goat named Nettle. Nettle apparently had chewed through a fence, entered a cabbage patch, eaten with enthusiasm, and then fallen asleep in the evidence. In most villages, this would have led to shouting, compensation, and possibly lifelong resentment served cold at every wedding. In Avonmere, the brothers placed hands upon the council stone. Each spoke. Witnesses spoke. Nettle contributed nothing useful. Etta listened. Then she ruled that the goat's owner would repair the fence, replace the cabbages, and spend one full afternoon helping his brother weed the garden. The goat was sentenced to a bell collar. Pip declared this harsh but fair. The traveler privately felt Nettle showed no remorse. Curiously, some medieval communities did hold animal trials, accusing pigs, rats, or insects of misbehavior before formal courts. Avonmere had nitrogen monoxide, such ceremony, but watching villagers discuss nettle with grave seriousness made the travelers suspect the goat would have done poorly under cross-examination. Later in the fields, he saw farming methods older than those used beyond the mountains. The villagers planted in narrow strips following the slope, with small stone channels guiding rainwater from upper terraces to lower beds. They mixed beans among grain to strengthen tired soil. Ash from hearths was scattered sparingly. Straw was saved, not wasted. Nothing was thrown away unless IT had been repaired, reused, composted, argued over, and finally declared impossible by at least 3 people. Their plow was light and old-fashioned, pulled by 2 patient oxen with flower garlands tied around their horns. The garlands were not decorative, Mara explained. They were part of a planting custom. Do the oxen appreciate IT? No, she sighed, but the children do. FAI are enough. At noon, workers paused beneath the shade of an elder tree. Bread, cheese, onions, and dried apples were passed around. The traveler received equal portions, not generous portions, equal ones. That distinction mattered. In many places, charity reminded a stranger of his dependence. Here, sharing reminded him he had hands. After eating, the villagers performed what Pip called the thorn walk. This involved carrying bundles of thorny branches to gaps in the outer hedges and weaving them carefully into the living fence. The task scratched everyone equally, which may have been its spiritual purpose. Why not build a wall? The traveler asked Torin. Walls invite questions. Hedges do not. Hedges invite rabbits. And is that better? Torin looked at him gravely. Rabbits do not demand taxes. A strong argument. By late afternoon, the traveler understood that Avonmere's peace was not softness. IT was labor, constant, patient, ordinary labor. Rules held because everyone depended on everyone else. A broken roof was not one family's problem if winter came hard. A spoiled seed store was not private misfortune. A feud was not personal drama. In a hidden valley, one person's bitterness could become everyone's hunger. Even their rituals served survival. Before dusk, every household sent one member to walk the inner boundary. They checked paths, stones, streams, fences, tracks. The traveler joined Mara along the northern edge, where ferns grew waist-high and the trees leaned close. At each boundary stone, Mara brushed away leaves and touched the carving of 3 trees. "Do you pray?" he asked. "Not exactly." "Then what is IT?" "Remembering." "What?" "That we remain because others chose carefully." She sawed nitrogen monoxide more. As they walked, she showed him small signs. Deer tracks, a broken twig, a place where rain had loosened earth near a drainage channel. She noticed everything. The traveler, who had survived years on roads by noticing whether shadows moved wrong, admired her skill. "You watch like a scout," he sighed. "My grandmother was one." "For the village?" "For those who came before the village." There it was again. The before, the old names, the careful silence around a wound never fully named. When they returned, evening had settled soft and blue. Lamps glowed in cottage windows. Someone played a reed pipe, the tune wandering lazily through the green. Children chased fireflies near the shrine, shrieking as though each tiny light were a treasure personally escaping them. Etta sat beside the council stone, twisting flax with slow fingers. "You have seen our rules," she sighed as he approached. "I have, and they are plain. Her eyebrow lifted. "And strong," he added. "Plain things often are." The traveler looked across the circle of homes. Avonmere had nitrogen monoxide castle, nitrogen monoxide court, nitrogen monoxide lord, nitrogen monoxide seal, no great law book guarded by monks. Yet its people had built something rarer than stone walls. They had built agreement, not perfect agreement. People still argued about goats, water, cabbages, and whether Pip should be allowed near anything breakable. But beneath those small quarrels lay a deeper promise. None would rise by pushing another down. The traveler had carried messages through kingdoms that claimed divine order, while peasants starved beneath banners. Here, in a valley erased from maps, order smelled of barley bread, damp wool, oxen, wood smoke, and thorn scratches. Not grand, not glorious, but alive. And as the night folded over Avonmere, he began to see why the village had lasted. IT had not escaped time by standing still. IT had survived by remembering exactly which parts of the world were worth keeping, and which parts deserved to be left beyond the trees. The fifth morning arrived beneath a blanket of low clouds that clung to the surrounding hills like wool caught on thorn bushes. The valley felt smaller, not cramped, protected. The traveler had begun noticing that the weather behaved differently inside Avonmere. Morning mist lingered longer, breezes arrived softer, and even the sunlight seemed to take its time spilling over the ridges. Whether the mountains shaped the air or the villagers had simply grown accustomed to its rhythms, he could not say after breakfast. Etta approached him carrying a walking staff, polished, smooth by many years of use. "You have seen how we live," she sighed. "I have. Today you will see WHY." Without another word, she turned toward the northern fields. The traveler followed. Mara joined them with a satchel of herbs slung across her shoulder. Torin carried a shovel, though when asked WHY, he merely replied, "One never regrets bringing a shovel." This seemed like the kind of wisdom acquired through unpleasant experience. Pip insisted on coming, as Will Etta told him no. Pip followed anyway. The adults noticed. None appeared surprised. Beyond the cultivated fields, the valley changed. The neat rows of barley gave way to rough grass dotted with wildflowers. Ancient apple trees twisted toward the sky, their branches bent into impossible shapes by centuries of wind. Moss-covered stones emerged from the earth in curious lines. That nitrogen monoxide longer resembled walls, yet clearly had once belonged to something built by careful hands. The traveler knelt beside one. Its surface bore tool marks unlike those used in the village today. Older, much older. He sighed quietly. Torin nodded. Once. They continued climbing. Soon they reached a low ridge overlooking the northern edge of the valley. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Then the traveler noticed the ground. IT was uneven, not naturally uneven. There were long, shallow mounds running beneath the grass, almost hidden now beneath centuries of growth. Earthworks, collapsed foundations. He counted them. Silently, 1, 3, 7, dozens. This was another village. Etta rested both hands upon her staff. No. She pointed across the hillside. This was the village. The traveler looked again. His breath caught. The scattered stones, the long grassy ridges, the strange empty spaces. He had assumed they marked abandoned cottages. Instead, they marked streets. An entire settlement had once stood here. far larger than present-day Avonmere. Curiously, medieval villages were sometimes abandoned because rivers changed course, disease spread, warfare destroyed livelihoods, or trade routes disappeared. Archaeologists today call many of these places lost villages, where only subtle bumps beneath fields reveal homes that vanished hundreds of years ago. The traveler suddenly felt as though he were standing inside one of those forgotten stories. Edda led them between the grassy mounds. Do not step carelessly. He obeyed, not because he feared traps, because this place felt deserving of respect. Eventually they reached what had once been a square. A circle of weathered stones surrounded a depression now filled with wild thyme. The scent drifted gently through the cool air. What stood here? The gathering place. Nitrogen monoxide council stone? There was one. What happened to IT? Edda smiled sadly. We carried IT. The traveler realized. The flat stone in the modern village had once rested here. They had not merely founded a new settlement. They had brought part of the old one with them. Mara knelt near the thyme. She carefully brushed aside loose earth, revealing carved lines beneath. The same symbol, 3 trees inside a circle. Only this version was older, rougher. Around IT ran smaller carvings nearly erased by time. The traveler traced one carefully, a bird, another, a stream. Then flames. His hand stopped. What happened here? Silence settled over the group. Even Pip, hiding poorly behind a fallen wall, remained unusually quiet. Torin finally spoke. War. The word landed softly, almost gently. Yet IT carried more weight than any. Speech. The traveler waited. No one hurried. Eventually, Edda continued. Our ancestors lived farther north. She gestured toward the hills beyond the valley. They served a lord. Which lord? We nitrogen monoxide longer speak his name. WHY? Because he believed names should outlive people. The traveler frowned. I don't understand. You will. They walked farther. Near the edge of the abandoned village stood the remains of a large stone building. Only one wall still rose above shoulder height. Its doorway faced east. Inside, ivy-covered broken flagstones. The traveler noticed something remarkable. Nitrogen monoxide religious carvings. Nitrogen monoxide altar. Nitrogen monoxide noble crest. Instead, dozens of simple handprints had been pressed into drying plaster centuries before. Adults, children, tiny. Hands beside enormous ones. An entire community leaving proof they had existed. He found himself imagining the moment. Fresh walls, laughing children, builders, pretending not to notice muddy fingers. Someone complaining the plaster would never dry properly. Life, perfectly ordinary life, interrupted. What building was this? A hall. For feasts, for deciding. Another council hall. The traveler looked toward Edda. You had nitrogen monoxide, Lord. We had one. And? He forgot we were people. The breeze strengthened. Tall grass rippled around the ruins. Somewhere above, a hawk circled silently. Pip emerged from hiding, attempting to appear as though he had always been walking openly. No one acknowledged his spectacular failure. Instead, Mara wandered toward what appeared to be the remains of a garden. Wild roses bloomed there now. Their fragrance filled the cool air. She picked none. Instead, she simply stood among them. My grandmother came here every spring, she sighed softly. WHY? to remember faces she never met. The traveler understood. Memory did not always belong to those who witnessed events. Sometimes IT belonged to those who inherited them. Near the far end of the old village, Torrin stopped beside a line of blackened stones. Unlike everything else, these bore unmistakable signs of fire. Even after generations, the surfaces had cracked from intense heat. The traveler crouched. There was a great blaze. Y-E-S. Accident? Torrin's expression answered before words did. No. No further explanation came. They did not need one. The blackened stones spoke clearly enough. As afternoon light filtered through passing clouds, Edda ellied them beyond the abandoned settlement toward a cluster of enormous oak trees. Between their roots stood several weathered markers, not elaborate gravestones, simple upright slabs. Most carried no names, only the symbol of 3 trees. The traveler counted them, far fewer than expected. Where are the others buried? They are not. He looked at Edda. Those we could bring home lie here. The meaning settled slowly. Those they could bring home. Not everyone had returned. Not everyone had been found. The valley seemed suddenly quieter. Even birds avoided this place. At last Edda sat upon a fallen stone. We have shown you enough for today. The traveler remained standing. One question pressed harder than all the others. If this happened generations ago, why E.S.? Why hide IT still? Edda looked across, the ruined streets now covered by meadow grass, because sometimes history wounds long after swords grow dull. Men who seek power love unfinished stories, she sighed. If they find one, they finish IT. The traveler frowned. And your ancestors feared they would return. They did not fear. What then? They remembered. The distinction mattered. Fear belonged to imagination. Memory belonged to experience. As they began, walking back toward the living village, the traveler looked over his shoulder one final time. The abandoned streets had nearly disappeared beneath wildflowers. Children of future centuries might walk there without realizing houses had once stood beneath their feet. Lovers might picnic where councils once argued. Shepherds might rest where craftsmen had worked. Time had covered everything with grass, but not completely. Enough remained for those willing to notice. Enough remained to whisper that Avonmere had not simply been built. IT had risen from ashes, carrying its people, and one heavy stone marked with 3 trees deeper into the valley, where they hoped history would finally lose their trail. The festival began before sunrise, which the traveler considered unreasonable. Any celebration requiring people to wake in darkness seemed suspiciously close to work wearing a prettier hat. Yet Avonmere stirred with quiet excitement while stars still clung to the sky above the ridges. Children carried baskets of flowers. Adults hung ribbons from doorways. Someone painted the council stone with pale clay, carefully tracing the 3 trees until they gleamed in the lantern light. Pip appeared wearing a crown made of twigs, feathers, and what might have been stolen onion stems. I am Lord of Misrule, he announced. That explains much, the traveler sighed. The festival, Mara told him, was called the Day of First Hiding. Not the Founding Day, not the Harvest Day. First Hiding, a strange name for joy. Yet the village treated it tenderly. There was nitrogen monoxide, heavy sorrow in the preparations. Only remembrance soft by bread, song, and the serious business of keeping children from falling into buckets of dye. By mid-morning, the green had transformed. Tables stood beneath the ash tree, covered with barley loaves, smoked fish, honey cakes, cheeses wrapped in leaves, pickled roots, and little pastries shaped like birds. The pastries were lopsided but charming. One looked less like a bird and more like a confused potato with wings. Medieval feast foods, the traveler knew, often carried symbols. Birds could mean freedom. Fish could mean blessing. Round loaves could mean the turning year. In Avonmere, nearly everything seemed to mean survival, which made even a honey cake feel oddly heroic. The first custom was called the quiet race. Children lined up at one edge of the green and had to cross to the council stone without making a sound. Nitrogen monoxide running, nitrogen monoxide laughing, nitrogen monoxide squeaking. Shoes. Nitrogen monoxide stepping on dry twigs placed deliberately in the grass. Pip lost immediately, not because he made noise with his feet, because he loudly accused the twigs of treachery. A little girl named Wren won by moving so slowly that everyone briefly wondered whether she had fallen asleep upright. Her prize was the first honey cake, which she accepted with the solemn dignity of a queen receiving tribute. Next came the game of false paths. Villagers built a maze from ropes, baskets, stools, and bundles of reeds. Blindfolded players had to find the center by listening to whispered guidance from their family. The trick, apparently, was that some relatives gave terrible directions on purpose. Torin was guided by his sister. He walked directly into a hanging sheet, apologized to IT, turned around, and nearly entered the duck pond. The village laughed so softly and warmly that even the hills seemed to smile. The traveler joined one round. Mara guided him. 3 steps left, she whispered. He stepped left. Stop, he stopped. Do you see K? He ducked. A wooden ladle swung above his head. Why is there a ladle? To teach humility. That feels excessive. You have not yet met the rake. He did, shortly afterward, with his shin. The crowd approved. By afternoon, music filled the valley. Not loud music. No trumpets, nitrogen monoxide war drums. Nitrogen monoxide grand courtly airs. Avonmere's music came from reed pipes. Small drums, clapping hands, and voices that rose and fell like wind through grass. Their songs had few words. Many were simply patterns of humming, calls, and echoes. One song began with a single voice from beside the council stone. Another answered from a cottage roof. A third from near the mill. Soon the whole village seemed to sing from different corners, as though remembering how their ancestors had once called to one another across danger without revealing too much. The traveler felt the sound in his chest. IT was beautiful. Also extremely hard to sing along with. He tried once. Pip told him, kindly, that he sounded like a goat learning philosophy. Fair enough. Then came the strangest custom of all. At sunset, every household brought one ordinary object to the green. A spoon, a spindle, a broken horseshoe, a child's shoe, a cracked bowl, a knife handle. Each object was placed around the council stone, while Etta spoke a name not of a person, but of a thing once saved during the flight into hiding. The red blanket, the iron pot, the little saw, the winter seed, the blue cup, the cradle peg. The traveler listened carefully. These were not treasures by noble standards. Nitrogen monoxide golden chalice, nitrogen monoxide jeweled sword, nitrogen monoxide saint's relic sealed in silver. Just things a frightened family had carried because life would need to continue after terror ended. That, he thought, was the real history of common people. Not crowns and treaties, but pots, seeds, blankets, and the stubborn decision to feed children tomorrow. When the naming ended, the villagers danced, slowly at first, in circles around the stone. Then faster, though never wildly, their feet stamped soft rhythms into the grass. Ribbons flickered, lamps glowed. Children darted between adults like sparrows who had misunderstood traffic laws. The traveler was pulled into the circle by Mara. "I don't know the steps." Nitrogen monoxide, one dose after the third turn. This proved accurate. The dance involved stepping inward, outward, turning once, clapping twice, and pretending that mistakes were local variations. The traveler became very locally varied. At one point, Torin spun the wrong direction and collided gently with Edda, who did not move at all. Torin bounced off her like a cart hitting a castle wall. Again, Edda said. Everyone obeyed. Night settled fully. Above them, stars appeared between drifting clouds. The hills became dark guardians around the bright green. The festival softened. People sat close, eating the last cakes, sharing cups of mild ale, and telling tiny stories, nitrogen monoxide, longer than a breath. A woman told how her ancestor had hidden a newborn under cabbages. A man told how the first millstone cracked, but still worked for 32 years out of pure spite. Pip claimed his family's heroic contribution had been saving 7 onions and a rooster with prophetic dreams. Did the rooster truly see the future? The traveler asked. No, Mara sighed, but I bit 3 men who later proved foolish. That is nearly prophecy. The festival ended with silence, not sudden, gradual. One by one, lamps were covered, voices lowered. Children were carried home half asleep, sticky with honey and victory. At last only the council stone remained faintly visible beneath moonlight, ringed by humble objects and fading flowers. Edda stood beside the traveler. You have witnessed what outsiders were never meant to see. I know. Does IT seem foolish? He looked at the spoon, the cracked bowl, the seed pouch, the twigs in Pip's ridiculous crown. Nitrogen monoxide, he said. IT seems like a village teaching itself how not to forget. Eddie nodded. Across the green, Mara lifted the last lantern and waited. The traveler followed her toward the mill shed, the music still moving gently in his memory. Behind him, the valley returned to darkness, but not emptiness. Never emptiness, only a hidden place holding its stories close, as carefully as a family once carried an iron pot through smoke and fear toward a future nitrogen monoxide map would ever find. The morning after the festival, Avonmere woke late, not shamefully late, just late ENOUGH, that the rooster sounded personally betrayed by everyone's lack of ambition. The green still held traces of celebration, flattened grass, wilted flowers, a forgotten ribbon caught on the well rope, and one honey cake crumb trail leading suspiciously toward Pip's house. Nitrogen monoxide 1 investigated. Some crimes, the traveler thought, were best left to legend. He helped Mara collect empty cups from beneath the ash tree while villagers moved slowly around them, SOFT-eyed from music and mild ale. The valley seemed peaceful in that fragile way, mornings after joy, often air, when laughter still lingers but chores have begun tapping their feet impatiently. Then Torm came down from the southern path with 2 hunters at his side. His face had changed. The traveler knew the look. Roads taught IT. Quickly, someone had found trouble before trouble found the village. Edda was called to the council stone. Within moments, people gathered, not hurriedly, but with sharp attention. Children were guided indoors. Tools were set down. Even Pip stopped, chewing whatever he had stolen. Torin placed something on the stone, a strip of red cloth. Not village dyed, not village woven. The traveler stepped closer. "That is from a traveling cloak," he sighed. Torin nodded. "Found near the lower ridge. Footprints? 3 people, maybe 4, 1 horse." The silence tightened. Outsiders. Not one lost messenger with a vegetable criminal mule. A group. Mara glanced toward the hills. How near? Past the ring stones. That caused murmurs. The traveler remembered the rule taught to children: never cross beyond the ring stones alone. Now strangers had crossed inward. Edda lifted the cloth. Did they see the valley? Torin shook his head. Mist was thick, but they found the old deer path. The council formed at once. Hands touched stone. Voices spoke in turn. Some wanted the paths blocked immediately. Some wanted scouts placed along the ridges. One woman suggested leaving false tracks toward the marsh, which seemed harsh until Pip whispered that the marsh only swallowed boots. Pride and one extremely foolish cousin. The traveler was asked what kind of people might be moving through the outer woods. He answered honestly: pilgrims, merchants, deserters, hunters, thieves, taxmen, lost nobles pretending not to be lost. The villagers frowned. "Which are worst?" asked Pip from behind Mara. Taxmen, several adults, sighed at once. The traveler raised a finger. "Lost nobles can be surprisingly competitive." No one laughed much. The decision came before noon. They would watch first. Help only if needed. Reveal nothing unless mercy demanded IT. That last phrase returned again and again. Unless mercy demanded IT. So the traveler went with Torin, Mara, and 2 hunters along the southern ridge. They moved through pine and hazel, stepping where roots held firm, avoiding damp leaves. The traveler admired how silently they crossed woodland. His own boots sounded, by comparison, like a kitchen accident learning to dance. Near the ring stones they crouched behind bracken. Below, beyond a fold of land, stood 3 strangers. A man in a patched brown cloak, a younger woman holding a staff, and an older man, sitting heavily beside a lame horse. They did not look like soldiers. They looked exhausted. Their packs sagged. Their clothes were muddy. The horse held one hoof awkwardly above the ground. The young woman pointed toward the misty slope. She was speaking urgently, though the words did not carry clearly. The older man coughed, a bad cough. Mara's expression changed at once. Healer first, guardian second. Torin caught her arm gently. "We do not know them. We know enough. They may bring others. They bring fever if he sits in wet grass all day." That was Mara's final argument, and like many healer arguments, IT had the unfair advantage of being correct. They watched a little longer. The younger woman tried to lift the older man. He nearly fell. The patched cloak man looked around desperately, as though hoping the forest might become an inn through sheer politeness. The traveler felt the village's hidden law pressing around them. Secrecy, mercy, 2 good things, now standing in each other's way like stubborn goats on a bridge. At last Edda, who had followed unseen and made nitrogen monoxide sound at all, stepped from behind a pine. "Bring them water," she sighed. Torin exhaled through his nose. Mara was already moving. The strangers startled when she emerged, and the patched-cloaked man reached for a knife. Torrin appeared beside her with H.I.'s axe, resting low but visible. That settled the knife's ambitions. "We mean nitrogen monoxide harm," Mara said. The young woman stared at her as though a tree had begun offering medical advice. "Who are you?" "Someone with water." This answer, while incomplete, proved persuasive. The older man drank greedily. Mara examined him and found chill, exhaustion, and a fever that had not yet rooted deeply. The horse's hoof held a stone lodged beneath the shoe, painful but fixable. The patched cloak man introduced them as travelers bound for a market town beyond the mountains. They had taken a wrong road after a bridge washed out. "Wrong roads are common," the traveler said. The man squinted at him. "You are not from here either." Apparently that is becoming a crowded occupation. The young woman almost smiled. They were not told of Avonmere. Not yet. Instead, they were ellied to a sheltered hollow outside the ring stones, where a small fire could be hidden beneath rock and brush. Food was brought: bread, cheese, broth, dried apples. The horse was tended. Mara brewed willow bark tea for the fever, bitter enough to make the older man look personally betrayed by trees. By dusk, the council gathered quietly nearby. The strangers slept. The village argued in whispers. "If they leave, they may speak of U.S., sighed one hunter. "They have not seen U.S., Torrin replied. "They have seen Mara. They have seen you." Pip, who had once again appeared where forbiddens, whispered, "They have seen your beard." That alone could become a legend. Torrin did not dignify this with a response. Etta asked the traveler what would happen if word spread of people living hidden in the valley. He did not soften IT. Some would come from curiosity, some from greed, some from law. A lord might claim your fields. A bishop might claim your souls. A king might claim your sons. The words fell hard. Mara looked toward the sleeping strangers. "And if we leave them helpless?" No one answered quickly. That was the trouble with kindness. IT refused to remain simple. In the end, Etta chose a narrow road between fear and cruelty. The strangers would be cared for until the older man could travel. Then they would be guided AWAY, blindfolded through a safe outer path. They would receive food, directions, and a story. That charcoal burners found them and left before dawn. It was not a perfect lie. Charcoal burners existed, generally smelled of smoke, and were famous for appearing wherever trees looked nervous. For 2 days, the strangers recovered in the hollow. The young woman asked questions constantly. Where did the food come from? Who made the broth? Why did the hunters vanish uphill? Why did the old woman with silver hair look like she could command weather if mildly inconvenienced? Etta answered almost none of these. On the third morning, the older man could stand. The horse could walk. The travelers thanked their unseen rescuers with the sincere confusion of people who knew they had been saved and carefully denied a full explanation. Before leaving, the young woman pressed a small bronze button into Mara's palm. For whoever helped you, see. Mara tried to refuse. The woman insisted. Then carry our thanks at least. When they were gone, ellied away through mist by Torrin and the hunters, the valley seemed to hold its breath for the rest of the day. Nitrogen monoxide alarm came. Nitrogen monoxide shout from the ridge. Nitrogen monoxide army of curious outsiders. arrived demanding soup. By evening, Avonmere exhaled. Yet the traveler understood something had changed. The village had chosen secrecy, yes, but not at the cost of mercy. And choices like that left marks, even when nitrogen monoxide map recorded them. That night, Eddie sent for the traveler, not with ceremony, not with a bell. Pep appeared at the mill shed door, holding a lantern and wearing the grave expression of someone entrusted with news far too important for his age and far too tempting to exaggerate. "Edda wants you? Now?" "No, yesterday I came slowly." The traveler reached for his cloak. Pip grinned, pleased with himself, and they'll lead him across the dark green. Avonmere slept quietly around them. Only a few windows glowed. The river murmured beyond the cottages. Somewhere, a cow sighed with the deep weariness of an animal who had spent all day being mostly stationary. Edda waited beside the council stone. Mara stood nearby, her arms folded beneath her shawl. Torin leaned against the ash tree, axe nowhere in sight, which somehow made him look more serious. The traveler understood before anyone spoke. The strangers had forced open a door in the village's long silence. Now something older wouldn't pass through. Edda touched the carved trees upon the stone. "You have been patient," she sighed. "I have tried. You have also been nosy." "I have tried that, too." Torin's beard shifted. A hidden laugh survived in there after all. Edda looked toward the northern hills, black against the starlit sky. "There are truths we do not give lightly, I know." "No," she sighed. "You suspect. That is not the same." She turned and began walking toward her cottage. The others followed. Inside, the room was small, warm, and plain. Bundles of herbs hung from beams. A low fire glowed beneath an iron pot. A shelf held wooden bowls, folded cloth, and 3 objects wrapped in faded linen. Edda lifted one bundle and placed IT on the table. She unwrapped IT carefully. Inside lay a rusted spur, a broken seal ring, and a strip of cloth embroidered with a symbol nearly ruined by age. The traveler leaned closer. A black tower, beneath a crescent moon. His mouth went dry. He knew that device, not because IT still flew on banners. IT did not, but because old chronicles loved villains, especially dead ones who could nitrogen monoxide longer object to dramatic descriptions. "The House of Vare," he sighed. Mara watched him closely. "You know IT. I know stories. Then speak them." The traveler chose his words with care. They held lands north of the mountains. Cruel reputation. Fought 3 neighboring lords. Accused of burning villages that refused levies. Their last baron died in rebellion against the crown. Edda's face did not change. The crown story. Yes, and before the crown wrote neatly, he waited. The fire popped softly. Edda touched the broken ring. "Before Avonmere, our people lived in Brackenholt. IT was not rich. IT had pasture, mills, orchards, and stubborn soil. They owed grain and labor to Baron Vare, as their parents had. Then came wars beyond their fields. The Baron demanded men, then more men, then boys old enough to hold spears badly." Torin looked down. Brackenholt refused the 3rd levy. The traveler listened. Outside, wind moved gently around the cottage walls. "Not loudly," Edda continued. "Not with banners. They simply hid the boys in the woods and sent back old men with walking sticks. IT was not rebellion in any grand sense. Nitrogen monoxide songs were made. Nitrogen monoxide, night roads shining into history. A village merely sighed. Nitrogen monoxide. A dangerous word, the traveler murmured. The most dangerous. Edda explained that Baron Vare had come himself with riders, expecting obedience. He found empty houses, buried grain, and women who claimed not to understand where any young men had gone. Perhaps they looked too innocent. Perhaps he had been drinking. Perhaps cruelty requires nitrogen monoxide reason beyond opportunity. He ordered the storehouses seized. Still the villagers did not yield. Then one of his soldiers struck a child, a potter's daughter, no more than 6. The village changed, not into warriors, into people who had reached the final inch of patience. They fought with hoes, stones, kitchen knives, fire hooks, and one beehive dropped from a loft onto a mounted knight, which Edda mentioned with visible satisfaction. An eccentric thing, perhaps, but medieval warfare rarely looked tidy when ordinary people joined IT. A disturbed hive could do what speeches could not. Persuade armored men to reconsider their life choices very quickly. The villagers drove Vare's riders out. For 3 days they believed they had won. Then the Baron returned with more men. Brackenhold burned. Edda spoke the words softly, not as spectacle, not as horror for its own sake, but as something already grieved for generations. Many died. Many fled. Those who escaped carried children, tools, seed grain, 1 millstone, 1 iron pot, and the council stone. They moved by night through ravines and old shepherd paths. Scouts cut false trails. Others stayed behind to confuse pursuit and never returned. Mara's grandmother's grandmother had been among the children hidden beneath sacks of wool. Torin's ancestor had carried the cracked millstone until his shoulder never healed properly. Pip's family, it turned out, truly had saved onions, not 7, 9. History had wronged him by undercounting. The survivors reached the valley after 13 days. A valley already known to charcoal burners and hunters, but ignored by lords because the approaches were miserable, the maps poor, and the weather deeply unhelpful. They rebuilt. First near the northern ridge. Then farther inward, they buried what dead they could recover. They forbade the old names, so Vare would not live forever in their mouths. And the king? The traveler asked. Edda gave a thin smile. The king punished Vare years later for rebellion, not for Brackenholt, never for Brackenholt. Of course, kings often discovered justice when IT arrived wearing political convenience. What of the survivors beyond the valley? Some were taken by other villages. Some vanished on roads. Some may have descendants who do not know U.S. The traveler looked at the broken seal ring. And you hid because Vare's men might return. At first, and later, because others would come claiming rights. A burned village leaves land. Land attracts ink. Ink attracts. Ink attracts. Men who believe parchment is stronger than memory. The traveler knew that too well. A lord's clerk could turn a meadow into property with a few careful lines. A bishop could turn grief into obligation. A king could turn refuge into taxable households before breakfast, if breakfast was delayed. Edda wrapped the objects again. We do not hate the outer world. Hate is too heavy to carry for so many generations. We simply learned that distance can be mercy. Mara's eyes softened. But mercy cannot be only distance. The rescued strangers had taught that. O.R. reminded them. Edda nodded. That is why one tell you now. The traveler looked up. Why me? Because you will leave. The room became very quiet. He had known, of course, a roadman belonged to roads, but hearing IT spoken felt like waking from a warm dream to find Boots waiting by the door. You want me to carry the truth? I want you to understand the weight before deciding what to do with IT. I could betray you. Yes, you trust me? Nitrogen monoxide. A pause. Then Etta added, but I trust what I have seen. That was more powerful than courtesy. The traveler sat beside the low fire for a long while. He thought of maps with blank spaces, of kings whose names passed unknown in hidden valleys, of a village that had survived by refusing to become a footnote in someone else's war. At last he sighed. I will not speak of the path. Etta studied him. Not for coin? Nitrogen monoxide. Not for favor? Nitrogen monoxide. Not even for a song? He sighed. That depends on the song. Mara laughed then, softly but fully. Even Etta smiled. Outside, the night deepened around Avonmere, and the hills kept their ancient watch. The traveler understood at last that the village had not been forgotten by time. IT had made a bargain with memory. IT would remember what the world erased, and in exchange, the world would be allowed to pass by, blind and busy, never knowing what still breathed beyond the trees. After Etta's telling, the traveler found sleep difficult. Not impossible. He was still a roadman, and roadmen learned to sleep under carts, beside damp hedges, near snoring pilgrims, and once, in his unfortunate case, within smelling distance of a tannery. Compared with that, the mill shed was practically a royal chamber. Still, his thoughts would not settle. Brackenholt, Baron Vere, the black tower beneath the crescent moon. Names moved through his mind like shapes behind fog. By dawn, he had made a decision. He would look again at the ruins, not to doubt Etta. He believed her, but belief and understanding were cousins, not twins. One could accept a story and still need to walk its edges, touch its stones, and hear what remained in places where people had stopped speaking. Mara found him preparing his satchel. You are going north. You notice too much. IT keeps people alive. Also uncomfortable, that too. She joined him without asking permission. Torrin came as well, carrying a coil of rope, a hatchet, and a loaf of bread. Peep attempted to come disguised as a bundle of sticks near the path. The disguise failed when one stick sneezed. Go home, Torrin said. I am studying history. You are studying trouble. They are related. No one could truly argue with that, but Pip was sent back anyway, loudly betrayed by scholarship. The three adults climbed through morning, mist toward the old settlement. Dew soaked the traveler's boots. Birds hopped among thorn bushes. A fox crossed their path, paused to judge them, and vanished with the effortless arrogance of a creature who had never paid rent. The ruins appeared slowly. First, the grassy mounds, then the broken hall, then the blackened stones. This time, with Etta's story fresh in his mind, the traveler saw more. A lane too wide for a village cart. A drainage ditch carefully lined with slate. A collapsed kill near the Potter's Quarter. Brackenholt had not been a miserable hamlet forgotten by fortune. IT had been organized, skilled alive. Near the broken hall, Mara showed him a stone half buried under moss. Carved upon IT was a faded mark, a crescent moon. The traveler brushed dirt from the lower edge. Beneath the crescent, barely visible, stood a tower. Veyr's mark. Torin spat into the grass. Careful, the traveler sighed gently. You may improve IT. Mara smiled despite herself. The mark proved that Veyr's authority had once been displayed here, not merely remembered, imposed in stone. They moved onward toward the northern boundary, where the old road had once entered Brackenholt. There, among nettles and young trees, stood the remains of a watchpost. Its foundation was narrow, but the view was wide. From that point, a guard could have seen riders approaching from the outer valley. Did they have warning? The traveler asked. Some, Mara sighed. Not enough, Torin added. Beyond the watchpost, the land dipped into a ravine choked with fern. The traveler noticed stones scattered in odd clusters along the slope. He climbed down carefully and found one shaped by tools, then another, then a third. A road marker, he sighed. Torin lowered himself beside him. Old boundary road, nitrogen monoxide, military. Mara frowned. How can you tell? The spacing. These were placed for mounted men, not carts. And here, he pointed to a rusted nail head embedded in timber, remains beneath the mud. Temporary bridge work. Torin's expression darkened. So Veyr came through here, likely. That meant the Baron had known the hidden approach. Someone had shown him. They followed the ravine until it widened near a cluster of fallen stones. There, sheltered beneath roots, the traveler found a shard of glazed pottery, blue-green, not local. He had seen similar ware in noble households. Beyond the southern mountains, though usually serving spiced wine to people pretending war was poetry. This came from a keep, he sighed. Veyr's? Mara asked. Perhaps. Then he noticed something else. A small metal fitting, blackened but preserved beneath clay. He cleaned it with his sleeve. Not a buckle, a book clasp. Monasteries used such things. Noble clerks, too. Torin leaned close. What does IT mean? IT means someone with documents passed through here. Mara looked toward the ravine. A taxman? Maybe. A steward? A messenger like M, but with better boots and worse intentions. The evidence changed the shape of the story. A burned village was one thing. A burned village connected to documents, military roads, and noble markings was another. Not random punishment. Policy. A decision written before flame reached thatch. The traveler felt cold despite the mild morning. Edda had spoken of refusal, levies, storehouses, and fire. But the ruins whispered something larger. Brackenholt had stood at the edge of a conflict. Between lords and crown, between local freedom and noble hunger. Veyr had not merely crushed disobedience. He had erased a community whose independence, even small, made his authority look fragile. History loved grand rebellions. IT often missed the quiet ones. A village hiding boys from war could threaten the Baron more than an army, because IT showed others that obedience was not as natural as rain. By midday, they climbed to a high outcrop overlooking the outer lands beyond the mountains. The traveler could see faint shapes in the distance. Ridges, valleys, a pale thread of road, and far beyond, perhaps the broken outline of an abandoned castle, he pointed. Is that Veyr's keep? Torin nodded. We call it Moon Ruin. The traveler knew of it by another name, Black Crescent Hold. Chronicles claimed IT had fallen after Baron Veyr rebelled against royal tax collectors and sheltered enemy knights. They mentioned siege engines, winter hunger, a dramatic betrayal by a cousin, and one very theatrical paragraph about ravens. They did not mention Brackenholt. Of course they did not. Peasant villages rarely entered chronicles, unless they burned beautifully in the background of noble affairs. A curiosity came to him then. Some medieval chroniclers recorded eclipses, monstrous births, comets, and royal dreams with great seriousness, yet ignored entire communities, unless those communities affected noble property. A two-headed calf might receive more ink than 100 hungry families. History, like Pip, sometimes had questionable priorities. From the outcrop, the traveler imagined the old conflict. Veyre squeezing villages for men, the crown squeezing Veyre for coin, neighboring lords, waiting like cats beside a fish stall. Brackenholt caught beneath IT all, not because IT sought glory, because it wanted to keep its children. Mara sat beside him on the stone. You see more now. Yes? And Etta was right. Torrin grunted, as He usually is, annoying habit. The traveler looked toward the distant ruin. There may be records. Mara turned sharply. Where? Monasteries, old courts, perhaps even in Black Crescent. If anything survived, would they name you Hess? Maybe not as Avonmere, but Brackenholt, yes. Torrin's jaw tightened. Then others could find the trail. Or they already could, if they cared enough. That was the uncomfortable truth. The village had survived partly because the world forgot, and partly because the world was lazy. Mountains, poor roads, old grudges, and administrative boredom had protected Avonmere as surely as hedges, but records remained dangerous. Ink slept lightly. They returned in late afternoon, carrying what they had found wrapped in cloth: the pottery shard, the book clasp, a small broken stone bearing Veyre's crescent. Etta listened, without surprise. When the traveler described the military markers in the ravine, her face grew still. My grandmother spoke of a guide, she said. A guide? One from Brackenholt who served Veyre to save his own household. He showed the riders a winter path. Mara lowered her eyes. What happened to him? No one knows. The village around them continued its ordinary work. Bread baked. Children argued. Nettled the goat tested, his bell collar with open resentment. Yet beneath the ordinary sounds, the past had grown louder. The traveler understood now that Avonmere was not merely linked to forgotten kingdoms. IT was proof of what those kingdoms had tried to bury: a noble betrayal, a royal silence, a burned village, erased because acknowledging it would make too many powerful men look exactly as small as they were. That evening, as mist gathered along the fields, the traveler stood beside the council stone and watched villagers pass in lamplight. They thought themselves hidden from time. Perhaps they were, but the ruins beyond the fields, the distant keep, the broken symbols under moss, all of it suggested that time had not forgotten them completely. IT had only been waiting for someone to listen carefully enough. Winter announced itself with a single dead leaf landing in the traveler's breakfast. Pip looked at IT solemnly. Bad omen. IT is autumn, the traveler sighed, still rude. Within days the valley changed. The soft greens dulled to bronze. Mist thickened along the river each morning. Frost silvered the roofs before dawn. The surrounding hills, once welcoming and secretive, now looked like sleeping giants pulling dark cloaks around their shoulders. Avonmere prepared without panic. That impressed the traveler. Most villages feared winter Because winter was not merely cold. Winter was accounting. Every lazy afternoon, every thin harvest, every broken tool, every roof ignored too long came knocking with icy fingers. And winter, unlike a merchant, did not accept excuses. The people moved steadily. Grain was checked. Apples were sorted. Fish were smoked until the air smelled rich and sharp. Firewood was stacked beneath lean-tos. Thatch was patched. Stone drains were cleared. Every household counted candles, salt, onions, beans, and dried herbs. Even Pip was given a task, collecting fallen twigs. He treated this as forced labor under a tyrannical regime. "You are picking up sticks," Mara told him. "History will remember. History will forget by supper." The first snow came early. It fell at night, silent and thick, covering fields, roofs, fences, and the council stone in smooth white. By morning, Avonmere looked less like a village and more like a memory tucked beneath wool. The traveler stood outside the mill shed, watching flakes drift from the ash branches. His mule hated snow, not fearfully, personally. The animal stepped into IT, froze, looked back at the traveler, and gave a bray that clearly meant, "You have mismanaged the ground." Avonmere laughed then. Not loudly, but enough. The first week passed well. Work continued indoors. Women and men alike spun wool, mended nets, carved handles, repaired baskets, sharpened tools, and told stories, while storms pressed against shutters. Children learned letters by scratching marks into ash boards. Elders inspected seed bundles as though each bean were a tiny sleeping prince. A curious old custom appeared on the third snowy evening. Every household placed one onion on its window sill. The traveler asked why. Torrin explained that onions were believed to absorb wandering sickness, sour luck, and unwanted spirits. "Does it work?" "No idea." "Then why do I tea?" Torrin shrugged. "We have onions." A practical theology. But then came the second storm, harder, longer. Wind hurled snow against the cottages until doors had to be dug open each morning. The river froze along its edges. The water wheel groaned and stopped. Paths vanished. The ringstones disappeared beneath drifts. Avonmere was sealed, completely. No path in. Nitrogen monoxide path out. The traveler understood. Then how fragile hidden life could be. Isolation protected the village from kings and taxes. Yes, IT also meant nitrogen monoxide emergency grain from a neighboring market. Nitrogen monoxide visiting Smith with spare iron. No monastery cellar opened in charity. If stores failed, secrecy would not fill bowls. On the 9th day, one storage pit was found spoiled. Moisture had seeped through cracked clay. A quarter of the beans inside had blackened. No one shouted. That frightened him more than shouting would have. The council gathered in the snow. Breath smoked from every mouth. Edda stood wrapped in thick wool, her silver braid tucked beneath a hood. The loss was counted. The remaining stores divided. Again, meals would be thinner. Work animals would receive less grain. Hunting parties would go out when weather allowed. Pip whispered, "Does this mean fewer turnips?" "Possibly." The traveler sighed. The boy looked as though civilization had ended. Hunger did not arrive immediately. IT crept. Bowls became less full. Bread grew darker with ground acorn and dried pea meal. Cheese was sliced thinner. Children were fed first, elders next, workers after. The traveler tried to refuse portions, but Mara glared at him until he accepted. Healers are terrifying, he told Torin. Only when correct. So always? Nearly. During a brief clearing, hunters went into the hills. They returned with 2 hares, 1 grouse, and a story about slipping into a snowbank so deep that Torin's cousin claimed he briefly saw spring at the bottom. The meat was made into stew for the whole village, stretched with roots and barley until even the hares might have struggled to identify themselves. Then sickness came. Not plague, not anything dramatic enough for chronicles, just winter fever. Coughs, chills, aching bones. The ordinary misery that killed quietly because nitrogen monoxide bard could make IT rhyme attractively. Mara moved from cottage to cottage with teas of willow bark, elderflower, and thyme. The traveler carried water behind her. He chopped kindling, held lamps, warmed cloths, and once spent an entire hour entertaining 3 feverish children with the thrilling saga of his mule's crimes against vegetable gardens. Children demanded a sequel. The mule's reputation spread. One night, Mara nearly collapsed outside the mill. The traveler caught her elbow. "You need rest. I need 12 hands and kinder weather. I have 2 hands and complaints, useful enough." They sat beneath the eaves while snow fell steadily beyond the lantern glow. She admitted softly that 2 elders worried her. The traveler had nitrogen monoxide answer. Some silences were not empty. Some were simply the shape of care when words were too small. By the 4th week, the village had bent but not broken. Neighbors slept in warmer, shared rooms. Firewood was pooled. The best blankets moved from house to house according to need. Pip gave his twig crown to a younger child who feared storms, claiming IT protected against thunder, wolves, and bad soup. Ita protected against none of these, but the child slept. Avonmere's ingenuity revealed itself in a dozen small ways. Hot stones wrapped in cloth warmed beds. Ash was banked overnight to preserve coals. Snowmelt was filtered through sand and charcoal. Frozen laundry was beaten clean rather than washed. Bread ovens were fired communally, one day for several households, saving fuel. The traveler had seen castles waste more wood heating empty halls than Avonmere used keeping every child alive. At last, after what felt like half a lifetime, the storms eased. The sky opened pale and blue. Sunlight flashed across the snow so brightly that everyone squinted. Like owls dragged into judgment, the village emerged, thinner, tired, alive. Etta ordered the council's stone cleared first. Not the paths, not the well, the stone. People worked together, shoveling away snow until the 3 carved trees appeared again. Someone laid a dried apple beside IT. Someone else placed an onion, because apparently onions had become spiritual officials. Then Etta spoke. "We remain." 2 words, no grand speech needed. The traveler looked around at the villagers standing in the winter light. Mara pale with exhaustion, Torin leaning on his shovel, Pip clutching his rescued turnip stores, children wrapped in mismatched wool, elders blinking against the sun. Avonmere had survived not because IT was hidden from time. Winter had found it easily enough. IT survived because every person had become a wall for another. And in that moment, with snow shining across the roofs and smoke rising once more into the clear, cold air, the traveler understood the valley's strongest secret. IT was not the path. IT was not the mist. IT was not the forgotten maps. IT was the stubborn, ordinary refusal to let anyone face the dark season alone. Winter loosened its grip so gradually that nitrogen monoxide won, and Avonmere could agree on the exact day IT ended. Pip insisted it was when the first frog began complaining near the river. Torrin argued IT was when the oxen stopped looking personally offended by the weather. Mara claimed spring arrived the moment she could gather fresh herbs without digging through frozen soil. Etta merely smiled. Spring begins, she sighed, when people stop talking about winter. By that measure, IT was still several weeks away. The snow retreated from the valley floor in patches, revealing damp grass flattened beneath months of ice. Streams swelled with meltwater, filling every ditch and channel. The water wheel groaned back to life, turning hesitantly at first, like an old storyteller remembering the beginning of a favorite tale. Life returned, slowly. Children ran farther from their homes. Geese resumed behaving as though they personally governed the valley. The traveler watched one particularly determined goose chase Pip halfway across the green. I did nothing. The goose clearly disagreed. Some disputes, the traveler reflected, were destined never to reach the council stone. Yet beneath the cheerful signs of spring, something had shifted. IT was not visible in the fields. IT lived in conversations. The younger villagers lingered after work, speaking quietly together beneath the ash tree or along the riverbank. Their voices dropped whenever older villagers approached, not secretive enough to escape notice, just secretive enough to invite curiosity. The traveler first overheard the discussion while repairing a fence beside Torrin. Never seen the outside. There must be more. How can we choose if we know nothing? Torrin sighed before the traveler could ask. They've started. Started what? The question every generation eventually asks. He hammered another wooden peg into place. When does hiding become staying? That evening the council gathered, not because of goats, not because of spoiled grain, because of voices. The entire village attended, young and old. Children sat cross-legged upon the grass while elders leaned upon staffs or stools. The travelers stood near the edge, careful not to intrude unless invited. Etta placed her hands upon the council stone. We speak tonight. One by one, villagers stepped forward. The first was Rowan, a young carpenter, barely 20 summers old. I have repaired every roof in this valley. He paused. I know every tree on these hills. Another pause. I wish to know what lies beyond them. No anger, nitrogen monoxide rebellion, simply honesty. Next came Lysa, a shepherd. I have heard stories of cities. She smiled faintly. They sound dreadful. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, but I would still like to see one. Then a young mother spoke. My daughter asks why we hide. She looked toward the child playing nearby. I nitrogen monoxide. Longer know how to answer. The words settled heavily. The traveler watched Etta's face. She did not appear offended, only thoughtful. Finally, Torrin surprised everyone by stepping forward. I remember my grandfather. The crowd quieted. He told me why we remained. Torrin looked around the circle. I believed him. He hesitated. I still do. Another pause. But belief is not inheritance. Several younger villagers nodded. They deserve their own reasons. The traveler realized he was witnessing something remarkable. Not conflict. Transition. The older generation remembered fear through stories told by grandparents. The younger generation remembered only peace. Memory had protected Avonmere. Time had gently softened memory. That was both beautiful and dangerous. Curiously, historians often observe that communities founded after great hardship change dramatically after 3 or 4 generations. Those who survived catastrophe organized life around avoiding its return. Their descendants, never having experienced that catastrophe themselves, naturally began asking whether old precautions still serve present lives. Avonmere had reached precisely that moment. Mara stood next. I have treated strangers. Everyone knew whom she met. They were kind. She glanced toward Etta. They reminded me that not every road leads to fire. Silence followed. Not disagreement. Reflection. Then came old Bran, the miller whose eyebrows continued resembling alarmed caterpillars. I was born here, he smiled. My father was born here. He shrugged. I've never cared what lies beyond the mountains. Laughter. What? The village leaned closer. If the young wished to look, he scratched his beard. Perhaps looking isn't the same as leaving. That simple sentence lingered. Looking isn't the same as leaving. The traveler felt its weight immediately. Until now, Avonmere had treated curiosity as a doorway best kept closed. Perhaps there was another way. Etta finally turned toward him. Roadman. He stepped forward. You have lived among U.S. I have. You have lived beyond U.S. I have. What does the world offer? The question seemed impossibly large. He considered carefully. It offers wonders. Faces lifted hopefully. IT offers cruelty. They nodded. It offers music unlike yours. Smiles appeared. IT offers cities where thousands gather. Curious whispers. IT offers kings who forget villages. No surprise there. IT offers libraries holding centuries of knowledge. Interest grew. IT offers diseases, wars, taxes, greedy men, generous women, beautiful forests cut into empty fields, markets where one can buy spices from land's nitrogen monoxide. One here has imagined. He smiled gently, and geese every bit as unpleasant as yours. That earned the warmest laughter of the evening. Then his expression softened. The world is neither monster nor miracle. He looked around the circle. IT is simply larger. No one spoke. At last Etta asked the question beneath every other question. If we open one door, she touched the council stone. Can it ever be closed again? No answer came. Because nitrogen monoxide, honest answer existed. Once a hidden village became known, even to a few trusted people. Knowledge had a habit of wandering, like seeds. Oh, songs. Oh, our mules searching for vegetables. The council ended without decision. Instead, Etta declared 3 days of reflection. Nitrogen monoxide arguments, nitrogen monoxide persuasion, nitrogen monoxide speeches. Thick. The villagers dispersed slowly beneath gathering twilight. Some walked home together, others alone. Children, blissfully unaware of history's heavier burdens, continued chasing each other around the green until mothers called them inside. The traveler found Mara beside the river. Neither spoke immediately. Water rushed past smooth stones, swollen by spring melt. What do you think? She finally asked. He skipped a pebble across the current. I think your village survived because it knew when to change. And now? I think this may be another of those moments. She watched the water. I've never left. I know. Would you? He looked toward the hills surrounding Avonmere. Beyond them lay roads, monasteries, ruined castles, noisy markets, lonely forests, generous strangers, dishonest officials, rain, dust, laughter, grief, the whole untidy world. I would return, he sighed quietly. Mara smiled. That wasn't my question. No, it wasn't. For the first time since entering the hidden valley, the traveler realized the greatest challenge facing Avonmere would not come from soldiers, wandering merchants, or forgotten barons. It would come from hope, because hope could be just as powerful as fear, and infinitely harder to keep hidden. On the morning chosen for the expedition, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Not dramatically, of course. Valleys are usually very calm about human decisions, but every window had someone watching. Every doorway framed a quiet face, and even the geese had gathered near the green as though preparing to offer useless military advice. 3 would go beyond the mountains. Tauren, because he knew the outer paths. Mara, because mercy tended to follow her whether anyone asked it to or not. And the traveler, because roads had been his trade long before Avonmere became his secret. Rowan the young carpenter begged to join them. Edda refused. You will go another day, if there is another day. Rowan did not like that answer, but he accepted it with the strained dignity of a man who very much wanted to kick a bucket and knew everyone would. Notice, Pip offered his services as scout, historian, negotiator, and emergency onion carrier. No, said Edda, you refused too quickly. I practiced. The expedition carried little. Bread, cheese, dried apples, water skins, a coil of rope, herbs, knives, spare wool, and 2 claws to cover their faces if they passed close to smoke or sickness. Mara also carried the bronze button given by the young stranger they had helped, tucked safely into her pouch. At the ring stones, the village gathered behind them. Edda placed one hand on Tauren's shoulder, then Mara's, then the traveler's. Look, she sighed. Do not boast. Do not bargain. Do not bring the world home by accident. That last one sounds difficult, the traveler sighed. ITEs. Then they crossed. The path beyond the ring stones climbed through dense pine, following an old deer track that slipped between boulders and thorn. Snow remained in shaded hollows, crusted and gray. The air smelled sharper beyond the valley, less of hearth smoke and damp fields, more of resin, cold stone, and distance. Mara walked silently for the first hour. At last she asked, Does the outer world feel different? To anyone. The traveler considered. It feels louder, even before you hear IT. Tauren grunted. That is not comforting. IT was not meant to be. By midday they reached the ridge. Avonmere lay behind them, hidden beneath folds of mist and green slopes. From above, the valley gave away almost nothing. A little smoke, quickly broken by wind, a few pale strips of field. Nitrogen monoxide, obvious road. Nitrogen monoxide, shining roof. Nitrogen monoxide, proud tower, announcing, Hello, invaders, kindly begin here. The traveler admired the old choice. The founders had hidden well. Then they descended the far side. The outer world arrived first as sound. A cartwheel squealing, a dog barking, an axe striking wood. Human noise, ordinary and enormous. Mara stopped. Below them, in a shallow valley, ran a road wider than any path in Avonmere, rutted muddy, lined with hedges, and clearly used often. A cart moved along IT, pulled by a weary horse. Two men walked beside it, arguing about whether rain was worse than hail. Rain was winning. Mara stared. That road is huge. IT is a small road, the traveler sighed. Torin looked at him. Do not ruin this with facts. They waited until the cart passed, then followed at a distance. Soon they saw fields. Open fields? Huge by Avonmere's standards. Strips of plowed land stretched toward a village clustered around a church tower. Smoke rose from many roofs. A manor house stood on a small rise, fenced and guarded by two men with spears who looked bored enough to be dangerous. Mara's eyes fixed on the church. So tall. Small, the traveler sighed, then caught Torin's glare. Smallish. A bell rang from the tower. Not one soft note like Avonmere's festival bell. This one struck the air with authority, as though reminding every soul within hearing distance that time belonged to someone else. They did not enter the village. Instead, the traveler allayed them along a side path to a wayside shrine near an old oak. There, travelers had left ribbons, stones, coins, and one carved wooden foot, probably offered by someone grateful for healing. O.R. deeply confused about sculpture. A peddler rested, there with his pack. He looked up as they approached. Roads foul southward, he sighed. Roads enjoy being foul, the traveler replied. The peddler accepted this as wisdom. They shared a little bread and received news in return. A new toll had been placed near the bridge. The old lord had died during winter. His son had inherited and immediately raised rents, which the peddler described as traditional stupidity. A sickness had passed through two villages eastward. Bandits troubled the forest road, and Black Crescent Hold, the ruined keep once belonging to Vare, had attracted treasure hunters after rumors of buried silver. At that, Torin's hand tightened around his staff. Mara noticed. The traveler kept his face calm. Treasure hunters? He asked. A-Y-E, sighed the peddler. Fools with shovels always think dead lords hide coins in walls. Usually they find rats. Torin muttered. Rats deserve better company. The peddler laughed. Mara watched him with fascination afterward. He spoke so freely. That was restraint, the traveler sighed. Truly, he had more opinions than teeth. By afternoon, they continued toward a market hamlet. For Mara and Torin, IT was overwhelming. The smells alone nearly stopped them. Hot pies, dung, wet wool, smoke, leather, fish, ale, horses, onions, and humanity gathered in confident layers. People shouted prices. Children darted between stalls. A woman sold ribbons bright enough to offend Avonmere's entire dye tradition. A monk argued with a baker over loaf weight. 2 chickens escaped a basket and caused more public disorder than most rebellions. Mara stood very still. Torin whispered, How does anyone hear themselves think? They don't, sighed the traveler. But that is why markets prosper. They bought salt with coins the traveler provided. Etta had insisted on returning value, so they carried carved wooden buttons, fine herb bundles, and 2 small woven belts. The merchant admired the weaving. Where made? North, said the traveler. North where? Cold north. The merchant shrugged. This answer satisfied him, proving that vagueness, when delivered confidently, was a valuable trade skill. Mara wandered to a stall selling glass beads. Blue, green, amber, smoky gray. She touched none, but her face softened with wonder. In Avonmere, beauty was usually useful. dyed cloth, carved handles, festival ribbons, polished bowls. Here beauty could be tiny, useless, and still treasured. Torin, meanwhile, examined iron tools with the expression of a man discovering both paradise and overpriced nonsense. At sunset, they left the market and climbed back toward the mountains. Nitrogen monoxide 1 spoke for a long while. Finally, Mara sighed, "IT is not all fire." "No," the traveler answered. Torin added, "IT is not all wisdom either. Also nitrogen monoxide." They camped beneath a leaning pine before crossing the ridge at dawn. The outer world glimmered below them with lamps, smoke, roads, bells, and problems. Behind them, unseen, Avonmere waited. Mara held the bronze button in her palm. "They are real," she whispered. "Who?" "Everyone beyond the stories." The traveler nodded. That was the expedition's true discovery. Not markets, not churches, not tolls or treasure hunters, but the simple, unsettling truth that the outside world was filled with people as ordinary as Avonmere's own. Frightened, funny, hungry, kind, greedy, tired, hopeful, and occasionally willing to pay far too much for ribbons. When they crossed back over the ridge, mist closed behind them like a curtain. The hidden valley appeared below, small, quiet, precious, not because it was the only safe place in the world, because now, for the first time, its people would have to choose it with open eyes. The return to Avonmere did not feel like arrival. IT felt like carrying a lantern into a room full of sleeping people, knowing the light would change their dreams. The village gathered before the council stone as soon as Torin, Mara, and the traveler descended from the northern path. Children crowded near the front. Elders leaned forward. Rowan stood with his arms crossed, trying very hard not to look desperate for every detail. Pip had prepared a list of questions scratched onto a piece of bark. His first question was, "Did anyone try to crown you?" "No," Torin said. Pip looked disappointed. Poor diplomacy. Edda raised one hand, and the murmurs faded. "Speak what you saw." So they did. Not quickly, not dramatically. They told of the road first, because roads mattered. A broad, muddy road with carts, hoof prints, strangers, and arguments traveling in both directions. Then the church tower, the manor house, the market, the toll, the peddler, the treasure hunters near Black Russet Hold. At that last detail, the village stiffened. Edda's eyes lowered. "Treasure draws fools," Torin said. "Fools draw questions." The traveler nodded. "They may never come near the valley, but old ruins wake curiosity." Mara spoke next. She did not speak first of danger. She spoke of people, the peddler sharing news without knowing them, the merchant admiring, Avonmere weaving, the woman selling glass beads, the sick villages eastward, the chickens escaping, the monk arguing over bread weight with the intensity of a man defending civilization itself. That made the crowd laugh, softly, at first, then more easily. Laughter helped the outside world become less monstrous. Rowan asked about tools. Mara described ironwork finer than any in the valley. Lysa asked about cloth. Torin, who had apparently noticed more than he admitted, described bright dyes, ribbons, and a cloak clasp, shaped like a fish with a deeply smug face. Pip asked if the geese beyond the mountains were stronger. "Equally wicked," the traveler sighed. The boy nodded grimly, as though confirming an international threat. Then Edda asked the hardest question. "Did anyone suspect?" The traveler answered, "Not Avonmere. Not directly. Could they?" Yes, there was nitrogen monoxide kindness in pretending otherwise. He explained that hidden things remained hidden partly because nitrogen monoxide 1 cared where to look, but treasure hunters at Black Crescent, old records in monasteries, curious peddlers, desperate refugees, ambitious clerks, any of these could tug a thread, and thread, once pulled, had habits. After the council, the village did not return immediately to chores. People lingered in clusters, asking more. What did the market smell like? Too much. Were there truly beads like drops of frozen sky? Yes. Did the manor guards look cruel? No. Mostly bored, which could become cruelty if given instruction. Could Avonmere trade without revealing itself? Possibly. Could children someday see the road? Perhaps. Could the road ever be unseen? No. That evening Etta asked the traveler to bring forth the old journals. He had not known there were journals. Few villagers did. They were kept in a clay-lined chest beneath Etta's floor, wrapped in waxed cloth and dried lavender. Not fine books. Nothing like monastery manuscripts. These were folded scraps, stitched leaves, bark sheets, bits of parchment reused from older documents, and wooden tally boards carved with marks. History made from whatever hands could save. They gathered in Etta's cottage. EDDA, Mara, Torin, Rowan, Lysa, Old Bren, and the traveler. Pip was banned, which meant he listened beneath the window until Mara opened IT and told him his breathing was louder than a cow in a cupboard. He relocated, not far. The first journal belonged to a woman named Annette, one of the children carried from Brackenholt. Her writing began crooked and uncertain, probably learned after reaching the valley. She recorded small things: the first winter, the number of hens saved, the day the cracked millstone turned, a birth, a fever, a song remembered by only 2 people. Not kings, not battles, life. The second record was carved on thin beechwood strips tied with cord. These held planting notes. Which field flooded? Which seed survived frost? Which herbs took root poorly? One entry simply read, "Do not trust the red mushrooms, even when Bren insists." Old Bren squinted. That was another Bren. Convenient, Torin murmured. An eccentric detail emerged from a tiny parchment fragment. The founders once used snail shells as counting tokens during rationing, because stones were too easily confused with ordinary stones and beans were too tempting to eat. The traveler imagined a council solemnly counting snails to decide supper, and felt an unreasonable affection for every ancestor involved. Then came the oldest account, not written by a scholar, by a miller named Orn, Torin's ancestor, the one who carried the broken millstone. His words were plain. He wrote of smoke seen behind them, of a child crying for a wooden horse left behind, of hiding in a stream while riders passed above, of one woman walking back toward danger because she had heard someone calling. She never returned. Nitrogen monoxide grand language. No curse upon Vayer. Nitrogen monoxide plea for vengeance. Only this line, read aloud by Etta in a voice nearly too soft to hear. We must become a place where children wake without listening for hooves. No one moved, the traveler felt. The sentence settle into the bones of the room. There it was, the heart of Avonmere, not secrecy for its own sake, not fear hardened into law, a promise. Children would wake without listening for hooves. Mara wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, then looked annoyed that eyes had betrayed her. Rowan stared at the floor. He was young, restless, hungry for the world, but now he had heard the first reason, not from elders guarding control, from a man long dead, writing by dim light after carrying stone through terror. The journals continued deep into the night. They told of hunger, jokes, births, mistakes, marriages, broken roofs, the first successful harvest, the first time children born in the valley outnumbered those who remembered Brackenholt. History narrowed and widened at once. The wider world had chronicles full of crowns. Avonmere had a note celebrating 3 surviving applegrafts, and somehow, by the fire, the applegrafts seemed more honest. When the reading ended, Etta placed the journals in the center of the table. "These are not chains," she sighed. "They are lamps." Raum looked up. "Lamps can be carried." Edda nodded slowly. "Yes." That answer changed the room. The travelers saw it in their faces, the choice before. Avonmere was not between remembering and leaving memory behind. Memory could travel. Stories could cross mountains. The old promise could remain, true even if children one day saw Market Road. Perhaps hiding had preserved them. Perhaps now remembering would have to do the work hiding once did. Outside, under the window, Pip whispered, "I heard everything." "No," Mara called. "You heard consequences." He fled. For the first time in days, everyone laughed freely. Later, the travelers stepped outside. The night was mild. Stars scattered across the dark sky. The council stone gleamed faintly in moonlight, and beyond the cottages rested in a circle of breathing silence. He thought of royal chronicles locked in abbeys, full of sieges and signatures. Then he thought of Annette's crooked words, Orne's plain grief, snail shells counted beside a winter fire. Truth, he realized, did not belong to those who wrote most beautifully. It belonged to those who kept faith with what had happened. And Avonmere, hidden from maps and kings, had kept faith for a very long time. The final choice did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like bread, slowly, through ordinary hands, with everyone adding something and nitrogen monoxide won, entirely sure whether the result would rise properly. For 7 days after the journals were read, Avonmere spoke of little else, not constantly. Chores still demanded attention. Goats still misbehaved. The water wheel still needed coaxing. Children still discovered new and artistic ways to get mud on clothing, nitrogen monoxide. One remembered giving them permission to wear. But beneath everything ran the question: remain hidden forever, or open one careful path? Etta declared that nitrogen monoxide decision would be made until every household had spoken at council. Not every elder, not every strong voice, every household, even widows, living alone, even young families, even old Bren, who claimed his opinion had already been fully expressed through eyebrow movement. It had not, Etta said. So the councils began. Each evening, lamps were placed around the stone. The village gathered in the soft blue hour after supper, when smoke rose straight from roofs and the hills turned dark against a fading sky. The first to speak were those who wished Avonmere to remain entirely hidden. A mother named Sella stood with her baby tied against her chest. "My son wakes without, listening for hooves," she sighed. "That is enough for Emmy." No one dismissed her. Nitrogen monoxide one should have. Fear for children was not cowardice. It was one of the oldest forms of wisdom, though It often wore tired eyes and smelled faintly of milk. A shepherd argued that one path would become two Two would become trade. Trade would become gossip. And gossip would become a reeve standing at the well, asking who owned what. The traveler had to admit this was not an unreasonable nightmare. A potter said the outside world would not understand Avonmere's rules. They will call you unlawful, she warned, because we live without asking permission. That sentence struck many deeply. Then came those who wished to open. Rowan spoke again. We cannot promise safety by knowing nothing. He looked toward the younger villagers. If danger comes, ignorance will not turn it away. Mara placed a bronze button from the rescued stranger upon the council stone. We helped them, she said. If we had known more roads, more medicines, more news, perhaps we could help others. Perhaps others could help us. Torin spoke after her. He surprised everyone. I do not trust the world, Pip whispered, shocking. Torin ignored him. But I trust you more than I distrust IT. That stayed in the air, a strange, sturdy kind of courage. Old Bren finally spoke near the end of the week. He leaned on his cane, frowned at the council stone, as though IT had personally caused the inconvenience. And Sahid, when I was a boy, my mother told me the valley was a bowl. Everything good stayed inside, everything bad stayed out. He paused. Then winter spoiled the beans. People smiled gently. Bad found US anyway. Good has to be carried, same as grain. For a man of few words, he had chosen dangerous ones. By the 7th evening, every household had spoken. No one had changed every mind, but many minds had widened. Etta stood beneath the ash tree, lantern light silvering her hair. There will be nitrogen monoxide, simple vote, she said. A few villagers looked confused. Hands raised too quickly can wound what words have tried to heal. Instead, she proposed a covenant. Avonmere would remain hidden from lords, taxmen, and curiosity. But it would nitrogen monoxide longer be hidden from mercy, knowledge, or need. One path would be known only to chosen walkers. Nitrogen monoxide map would be drawn. Nitrogen monoxide stranger would be brought directly into the valley unless the council agreed, or unless life itself hung by a thread. 3 walkers would go beyond the mountains each season to listen, trade small goods, learn news, and return. Children would be taught not only why the valley hid, but what lay beyond IT. The journals would be copied, not for outsiders, for Avonmere's own future, so memory would not thin into obedience. The council stood silent. Then Sela, the mother who feared opening most, stepped forward. She placed both hands upon the stone. My son must wake without listening for hooves, she sighed. Then she looked at Rowan. But he should know what hooves sound like. One by one, villagers touched the stone. Agreement did not come as cheering. IT came as contact. Hands upon old rock, rough hands, small hands, wrinkled hands, hands that had planted, healed, carved, kneaded, buried, and lifted. Pip placed both hands down with dramatic force. I accept the burden of future expeditions. No, sighed Etta, Mara, Torin, and at least 6 others. History fears me. History is relieved, the traveler sighed. That night, Avonmere held nitrogen monoxide festival. Only a shared meal. Thick soup, bread, the last of the winter apples, and a little ale. People ate close together, not because they had decided easily, but because they had decided together. Later, Etta found the traveler by the mill. You will leave soon. Yes, and carry nitrogen monoxide map. Nitrogen monoxide map. And nitrogen monoxide name? He looked across the green. I will carry the truth carefully. That is not what I asked. He smiled faintly. No, I will not speak Avonmere's name. Etta nodded. Then, after a long silence, she sighed. But you may remember IT. The traveler felt something loosen in his chest. Permission? Perhaps. O.R. farewell, beginning its quiet work. The next morning, the first covenant marks were carved into 3 walking staffs. Not directions, not symbols any outsider would understand. Just 3 small trees hidden among decorative cuts. A reminder that those who crossed beyond the ring stones carried the village with them. Mara received 1. Torin received 1. The 3rd was placed in Rowan's hands, though Etta warned him he would not leave until autumn. Rowan held IT as though IT were a sword, a key, and a sleeping bird all at once. The traveler watched from beside his mule. Pip sidled up to him. When you go, will you miss us? Yes, even the geese? Nitrogen monoxide. Honest, good. The boy handed him something wrapped in cloth. Inside lay a turnip, small, slightly bruised, probably stolen. For the mule. Pip sighed. So he does not commit crimes immediately. A noble attempt at reform. It will fail. Almost certainly. They stood together in comfortable silence. Across the green, Mara looked toward the mountains, her new staff in hand. Torin examined the sky. Etta spoke quietly with Sella. Children chased one another around the council stone, not yet understanding that they had just inherited a wider world. Perhaps that was mercy, too, to let children enter great changes through play. By dusk, the traveler knew the decision had settled. Avonmere would not fling open its gates, because IT had none. IT would not announce itself to kings, because kings had poor listening habits. IT would not become a market curiosity or a noble claim, but IT would breathe outward, carefully, season by season, step by step. The village, hidden from time, had chosen not to remain frozen inside IT, and as evening bells of nitrogen monoxide church rang nowhere in the valley, as smoke lifted and the river murmured beside the mill, the traveler understood that the final choice had never truly been between hiding and revealing. IT had been between fear and wisdom, and Avonmere, stubborn, scarred, funny little Avonmere, had chosen wisdom with muddy boots, scratched hands, and just enough sarcasm to keep history from becoming too pleased with itself. Morning arrived wrapped in pale gold. The mist that usually lingered over Avonmere lifted early, drifting slowly toward the surrounding hills, as though even IT understood that farewells deserved a clear view. The traveler woke before the village, not because he wished to leave, because departures always carried a peculiar restlessness. Nitrogen monoxide matter, how many roads a person had walked. There was always that quiet moment before setting out when boots seemed heavier than they had the day before. His mule, on the other hand, showed nitrogen monoxide sign of emotional complexity. IT immediately wandered toward a nearby vegetable patch. Some traditions deserved consistency. The traveler rescued the vegetables, apologized to nitrogen monoxide 1 in particular, and walked toward the council stone. Someone was already there, Etta. She stood with one hand resting upon the ancient carving of the 3 trees, watching the sunrise spread across the valley. Neither spoke for a while. The silence between them, nitrogen monoxide, longer felt uncertain. IT had become the comfortable silence shared by people who had earned one another's trust through many ordinary days. At first, Etta sighed quietly, I hoped you would leave quickly. I noticed. I wondered whether telling you nothing would keep you as safest. And now? She smiled faintly. I think silence also has limits. The traveler looked across the waking village. Smoke rose from the first chimney. A dog stretched lazily outside a cottage. Someone opened shutters. Children's laughter floated faintly through the crisp morning air. Nothing remarkable. Exactly the sort of ordinary beginning the founders of Avonmere had dreamed of generations before. Mara arrived carrying a small cloth bundle. For the road. Inside were fresh bread, smoked cheese, dried apples, and a small packet of herbs. In case you forget how to make proper tea. I suspect your definition of proper is very strict. It is. Torin joined them carrying a newly carved walking stick, not one marked with the hidden symbol of the seasonal walkers. This one bore simple carvings of oak leaves climbing its length. You walk enough, he sighed. You should have decent wood beneath your hand. The traveler accepted IT carefully. IT is too fine. Torin shrugged. So become worthy of IT. That sounded exactly like something Torin would consider encouragement. Soon the entire village gathered. Near the edge of the northern path, nitrogen monoxide speeches had been planned. Avonmere did not seem fond of grand endings. Instead, people came one by one. The potter pressed a small clay whistle into his hand. It sounds like a blackbird. It sounded more like an enthusiastic duck, but the intention was excellent. The shepherd offered wool gloves. Old Bren handed him a tiny sack of apple seeds. Plant them somewhere honest. The traveler promised he would. Rowan clasped his forearm. When autumn comes, you'll see the road. Yes. And remember, I will. PIP approached last. Naturally, he carried himself with extraordinary dignity. I have prepared a farewell. Oh? Yes. He cleared his throat. Tell the outside world. Everyone leaned in. That our geese are unavailable. The traveler blinked. That is your message? They are valuable. I see. Nitrogen monoxide. Pip smiled broadly. You don't? Laughter rolled gently through the gathering. Even Etta laughed openly now. The traveler realized that the valley had changed not only through decisions, but through something quieter. Its people laughed more easily. The old fear had not vanished, but IT nitrogen monoxide longer sat at every table. Etta stepped forward. She held something wrapped in faded linen. Slowly, she unfolded IT. Inside lay a small wooden carving. 3 trees inside a circle. Nitrogen monoxide, larger than his palm. This is not the village's mark, she sighed. He looked up. IT resembles IT. She turned the carving over. The back was blank, so that nitrogen monoxide curious eye understands. He accepted IT with both hands. This is dangerous. Nitrogen monoxide, she smiled. IT is trust. The word settled more deeply than any gift. Trust. Not earned through heroic battles. Not purchased. Simply built day after day. Question after question. Meal after meal. Shared work. Shared winter. Shared truth. The traveler fastened the carving inside his satchel where nitrogen monoxide wandering eye might glimpse IT. Then he looked once more across Avonmere. Children already chased one another around the green. Torin was arguing with a fence post that refused cooperation. Mara was examining herbs near the riverbank. Old Bren had apparently begun lecturing a chicken about proper behavior. The council stone rested quietly beneath the ash tree. Nothing looked extraordinary. That was precisely the miracle. History often remembered castles, battles, kings, victories carved into monuments. Yet the greatest triumph the traveler had ever witnessed looked like people beginning another peaceful morning. He adjusted his pack. His mule, perhaps sensing genuine departure at last, actually faced the correct direction. A historical achievement. The villagers walked with him as far as the ring stones. There they stopped. Nitrogen monoxide farther. This boundary belonged to the walkers, to those leaving, to those returning. The traveler crossed alone. Halfway up the path he turned. Below him lay the hidden valley. Mist had begun, gathering once more, drifting gently between fields and cottages. Already the village seemed to blur, its outlines soft, its roofs disappeared beneath pale silver ribbons. Soon only the smoke remained visible. Then even that faded. Within minutes, the valley had vanished completely. Anyone walking the ridge would have seen only forest, only hills, only another forgotten corner of the world. The traveler smiled, exactly as IT should be. He continued southward. Days became roads, roads became villages, villages became monasteries, bridges, ferries, inns, lonely shrines, muddy crossroads, bustling markets, and quiet forests. He carried messages, collected stories, watched seasons turn. Whenever someone asked whether he had ever discovered anything remarkable during his travels, he answered truthfully, yes. What was IT? He would smile. A village that taught me history lies best in ordinary people. They usually expected more. Hidden treasure, lost kings, ancient monsters, secret armies. He disappointed them wonderfully because some truths protected themselves by sounding almost too simple. Years later, the traveler planted old Bren's apple seeds beside a quiet monastery orchard. Not all survived, a few did. Every spring they blossomed, every autumn they bore fruit. Travelers resting beneath their branches sometimes remarked how peaceful the place felt. None knew why. The traveler never explained. Some stories belonged to everyone. Others belonged to those who had trusted you enough to tell them. And somewhere beyond forests, mountains, forgotten roads, ruined keeps, and maps that still failed to notice what mattered most. Avonmere endured. Children learned both the old journals and the outer roads. Seasonal, walkers crossed the ridges with careful steps. Knowledge returned alongside salt, iron, seeds, songs, and news. Mercy crossed the mountains as faithfully as memory. The council stone remained at the center of village life. Hands continued touching its weathered surface before difficult decisions. The promise written by Oran generations earlier endured. Children woke without listening for hooves. Not because danger had vanished from the world, but because generations of ordinary people had chosen again and again to protect one another with wisdom instead of fear. And that, more than hidden valleys or forgotten maps, became Avonmere's true legacy, a place that time had never really forgotten, only quietly respected. As the story settles into silence, let your thoughts drift as gently as the mist that still curls between the hills surrounding that hidden valley. There is nitrogen monoxide. Need to hurry after the traveler now. His road stretches onward, peaceful beneath soft skies, while Avonmere continues its quiet rhythm beyond the forests. asking nothing from the world except the chance to greet another gentle sunrise. Imagine the council stone resting beneath the old ash tree, warmed by countless hands over countless years. Imagine children laughing where fear once lingered, gardens growing where ashes once cooled. A&D simple cottages glowing softly against the evening light. Somewhere bread is baking. Somewhere a mill wheel turns with its familiar creak. Somewhere an old story is being told once more, not to preserve sorrow, but to remember kindness. The hills keep their watch without burden. The river follows its timeless course. Stars appear one by one above rooftops, hidden from every map, but safely held within memory. Every season arrives when IT is ready. Every harvest follows patient work. Every morning begins with hope carried quietly from one generation to the next. And perhaps, as your own day slips gently away, you can carry a little of Avonmere with you. Its calm, its steady courage, its laughter shared over simple meals, and its quiet belief that the strongest walls are often built not from stone, but from trust. May your own thoughts become as peaceful as that hidden valley. Your worries drift away like morning mist, and your rest be as gentle as the soft evening breeze moving through the 3 old trees that have watched over Avonmere for so very long. Sleep well.